Look, I didn't mean to spend 6 hours reading about cult rituals gone wrong, but then I found the one with the glitter-covered corpse shrine, and the one with the ear trophies, and the one with the sarin gas. Now you're coming with me. The Jonestown Massacre. It was November 18, 1978, and Jim Jones had officially lost his grip. Somewhere in the jungle of Guyana, in a place called Jonestown, over 900 people, many of them Americans, were lined up and handed cups of cyanide-laced punch. Not metaphorically. Not symbolically. Literally. Poisoned fruit drink. And yes, it was actually Flavor Aid, not Kool-Aid. Even the brand got dragged into history's worst group death. Jones had started as a preacher who called for racial equality. That was back in Indiana, before things got weird. Fast forward to California in the 70s, he's got a megachurch, political allies, and a growing God complex. When investigations started sniffing around, Jones packed up his flock and moved them to Guyana for a utopia. What he built was a jungle prison with one rule: don't question Jim. That rule died when U.S. Congressman Leo Ryan showed up. He flew down to investigate reports of abuse. At first things looked peaceful, but then some cult members slipped Ryan notes begging for help. They wanted out. That didn't sit well with Jones. As Ryan and his team tried to leave, Jones sent gunmen to the airstrip. They opened fire. Ryan, 3 journalists, and a defector were killed. And that was just the opening act. Back at Jonestown, Jones gathered his people and said it was time for revolutionary sacrifice. Only, plenty of folks weren't ready to die. Guards with guns made sure they drank. Syringes were used on babies. The children died first, then their parents, then the elderly. By the end of it, Jones was dead, and so were 918 others. About 304 of them were kids. It was billed as a ritual of defiance. In reality, it was a mass slaughter orchestrated by a man who liked the sound of his own voice more than human life. Survivors later said they escaped by hiding in the jungle or pretending to be dead. The whole thing took less than a day. The bodies were found stacked, face down, arms around each other. A so-called paradise turned into a chemical graveyard because one man with sunglasses and a microphone couldn't handle losing control. Yahweh Ben Yahweh's bloody loyalty tests. In 1980s Miami, a man named Hulan Mitchell Jr. decided he was the son of God. He renamed himself Yahweh Ben Yahweh, threw on a white robe, and founded the Nation of Yahweh. His followers? Hundreds. His tactics? Charisma, scripture, and violence wrapped in a messiah complex. On paper, the Nation of Yahweh promoted black empowerment, economic self-sufficiency, and spiritual unity. In reality, it was a cult that dressed its criminal activity in divine language. Followers were told to purge white devils and enemies. But this wasn't just angry preaching. Members were allegedly ordered to kill and bring back proof. That proof? Severed ears. In 1981, a series of bizarre and brutal killings swept through South Florida. The victims included homeless men, supposed informants, and ex-members. One man was beaten, strangled, and beheaded. Another had his ear cut off while still alive. Cult enforcers didn't just act out of blind rage. They were carrying out what they saw as sacred assignments. Blood for blessings. The FBI got involved. It wasn't easy. Members didn't talk. Victims disappeared. Evidence vanished. It took nearly a decade before the case cracked. In 1990, a former member testified that the murders were part of initiation rituals. If you wanted to rise in Yahweh's inner circle, you had to spill blood for the cause. No murder, no promotion. That same year, Yahweh Ben Yahweh was indicted on federal racketeering and conspiracy charges. Prosecutors tied him to 14 murders, though he was only convicted for one because a witness finally stepped forward. He got 18 years in prison. He still claimed to be a holy man. He died in 2007, wearing a turban and a smirk. People living in Miami at the time weren't just dealing with street crime. They had a cult in their city, hiding behind a tax-exempt religious label, training people to kill for power and approval. The Ant Hill Kids. Ruch Therio wasn't a doctor. He wasn't even a dropout with good intentions. He was a bearded madman who convinced a bunch of people in rural Quebec that he was the mouthpiece of God, and then he turned his cult into a torture camp with a cross on the front. The cult was called the Ant Hill Kids, and it started in 1977. Therio told his followers to quit their jobs, move into the woods, and prepare for the apocalypse. While the world waited for doom, he made sure he had a steady supply of power, loyalty, and absolute control. He banned contact with outsiders, made wives out of underage girls, and ran the commune like a violent playpen. They built log cabins. He built terror. If you disobeyed Roch, you didn't get excommunicated. You got punished. Naked beatings, freezing, burning, and worse. He said it was God's correction. When a child cried, he'd order the mother to spank the kid, then punish her for not spanking hard enough. By the mid-80s, the cult had over a dozen children and more than 30 members, all stuck in a cycle of trauma dressed up as spiritual cleansing. Then came the surgeries. Theo called them miracles. In reality, he'd get drunk, grab kitchen tools, and perform gruesome procedures. One woman lost her arm to a meat cleaver with no painkillers. Another was cut open so violently, her injuries were beyond repair. The worst case was Solange Boillard in 1988. She complained of stomach pain. Theo gave her a bizarre treatment with molasses and oil, then performed a crude operation on her stomach. The injuries were fatal, and she didn't survive. Here's where it gets worse. Theo didn't panic. He claimed he could bring her back. He ordered others to drill into her skull and carried out what he called a divine resurrection ritual. It didn't work. Her body was hidden, but not for long. The truth came out when another victim, Gabrielle Lavallee, escaped. She was missing a finger, part of her breast, and had wounds crudely stitched with fishing line. She went straight to the police. Theo was arrested in 1989. He got life in prison. One of his victims stabbed him to death in 2011 behind bars. Superior universal alignment. This wasn't a jungle cult. This was a cult hiding in plain sight in small-town Brazil with beliefs that led to real-world horror. Between 1989 and 1993, the city of Altamira became the center of a disturbing string of crimes targeting young boys. And behind it all was a woman named Valentina de Andrade, and her group, the Superior Universal Alignment. Valentina, originally from Argentina, styled herself as a prophet. She claimed she had received messages from higher beings. One of those messages? That children born after 1981 were spiritually empty and stood in the way of Earth's future. Her followers believed her, completely, and many of them weren't outsiders. They were doctors, business owners, and even public servants. That's what made this cult so dangerous. It wasn't on the fringes, it was embedded in society. Over the course of 4 years, at least 19 boys disappeared. Some were later found in horrifying condition. Others were never seen again. Locals began to whisper about ritualistic practices, strange meetings in the woods, and connections no one wanted to believe. For a long time, the authorities stayed quiet. Too quiet. Everything changed when one survivor managed to escape. Badly injured, he gave police a detailed account of what had happened. His testimony helped unravel the network of followers and sparked a full investigation. The evidence connected cult teachings to the disappearances. That's when the public learned how deep this went. In 2003, 5 cult members were convicted of serious charges, including conspiracy and attempted murder. But Valentina? She walked free. Despite being named as the leader and ideological core of the group, she was acquitted due to a lack of direct physical evidence. She denied everything, even after her own writings suggested otherwise. As of the latest updates, she's still alive and still not behind bars. This wasn't about cosmic energy or spiritual awakening. This was a group that twisted strange beliefs into real-world harm, hidden under layers of false light. What looked like mysticism was just a blueprint for who wouldn't make it home alive. Aum Shinrikyo's deadly gas ritual in Tokyo. On the morning of March 20, 1995, Tokyo commuters boarded their subways like it was any other Monday. What they didn't know was that 5 men were quietly placing plastic bags filled with liquid sarin, a powerful nerve agent, onto crowded trains and piercing them with sharpened umbrella tips. This wasn't a terrorist attack by some foreign cell. It was the work of a Japanese doomsday cult called Aum Shinrikyo, led by a half-blind yoga instructor turned apocalyptic prophet named Shoko Asahara. His followers believed the world was heading for total destruction and that only they would survive and rebuild it. Asahara preached a mix of Buddhism, science fiction, and chemical warfare. He claimed to be Christ. He said the US would destroy Japan, then he said he would save it by striking first. That's where the sarin came in. Aum didn't just dream of chaos. They prepared for it. The cult built labs, created chemical weapons, and tested them on animals and allegedly on humans. On that March morning, the attack killed 13 people, permanently injured over 50, and temporarily sickened more than 5,000. Victims foamed at the mouth, collapsed, and choked while the trains kept running. Paramedics didn't even know what they were dealing with. At first, they thought it was a gas leak. It wasn't. It was cult-level chemistry on a rush-hour train. Police raided Aum's compounds days later and found stockpiles of chemicals, weapons, and documents outlining even bigger plans. They weren't done. They were just getting started, until Japan said otherwise. Over the next few years, dozens of members were arrested. Asahara was sentenced to death in 2004. He was executed in 2018, along with several of his top leaders. At its peak, Aum Shinrikyo had over 10,000 followers in Japan and thousands more worldwide. They weren't isolated. They weren't disorganized. They wore lab coats, not robes. The solar temple transits. In the early 90s, two European cult leaders decided that death was just the start of a very exclusive space cruise. Meet Joseph DiMambro and Luc Jouret, founders of the Order of the Solar Temple, a cult that believed dying in a ritual transit would launch them into eternal life on a planet orbiting the star Sirius. Their followers weren't uneducated or unstable. Most were middle-class professionals, bankers, doctors, even civil servants. And they all bought into this mix of New Age mysticism, Freemason knockoff rituals, and pure delusion. Members were told that the Earth was corrupt and violent, and the only way out was to ascend through planned death. That ascension started in 1994, when 53 people were found dead in Switzerland and Quebec. Some were shot. Others were drugged and arranged in circles, dressed in ceremonial robes. Many of the scenes were set on fire. Some victims were found with plastic bags over their heads. One couple had been forced to kill their own child, who DiMambro claimed was the Antichrist, before dying themselves. If that sounds like the end, it wasn't. 2 years later, another 16 members died in France, also dressed for their cosmic departure. Then in 1997, 5 more bodies were found in Quebec, laid out in a star formation, always with the robes, always with fire, always with the same letter left behind, explaining how this was not a ritual death, but a transit to another level. In total, 74 people died across 3 countries. The leaders didn't go first, they went last, after orchestrating the deaths of their closest followers. DiMambro died in 1994. Jouret, too. Some say they realized they were running out of time. Others think they simply couldn't control the monster they built. The Solar Temple didn't fade out. It just stopped making headlines. The group still exists today, smaller, quieter, and very much under watch. Heaven's Gate. They wore black Nikes, drank phenobarbital-laced pudding, and carefully pulled purple shrouds over their heads. In March 1997, 39 members of the cult known as Heaven's Gate laid down in a San Diego mansion and never got back up. This wasn't a last-minute decision. It was rehearsed, practiced, filmed. Their leader, Marshall Applewhite, said it was the only way to catch a ride on a spaceship hidden behind Comet Hale-Bopp. The ship would beam up their souls, drop their earthly containers, and deliver them to the next level. But first, they had to die. Applewhite had been preaching this for years. He and co-founder Bonnie Nettles started Heaven's Gate back in the 1970s. It was a weird cocktail of Christianity, UFO lore, and extreme body denial. Members gave up relationships, family, and even names. Some underwent voluntary castration to stay pure. They saw Earth as a corrupt wasteland and Applewhite as a divine guide to something better. When Hale-Bopp hit the news in late 1996, Applewhite decided the time had come. The cult rented a mansion in Rancho Santa Fe. They made videos explaining their decision. Calm, smiling, and disturbingly normal. They called it a final exit. They dressed in matching black outfits with patches that read Heaven's Gate Away Team, yes, like Star Trek. Over the course of 3 days, the group died in shifts. They took the pills with pudding or applesauce, then chased it with vodka. Each person helped the next prepare. Black cloths were laid over faces. The last 2 people used plastic bags to finish the job, then covered each other. One member stayed behind just long enough to send the tapes and alert authorities. On March 26, police entered the house. Inside, they found all 39 bodies, neatly arranged in bunk beds and cots. Identical clothes, identical shoes, no signs of struggle. Just absolute, chilling coordination. Applewhite was among the dead. Nettles had died from cancer in 1985. He claimed she had already boarded the ship spiritually and was waiting for them. Spoiler, there was no ship. No alien rescue, no level up, just a rental mansion full of corpses and a belief system that took obedience past the point of no return. Ugandan apocalypse. In Uganda, the new millennium didn't start with fireworks. It ended with flames and over 700 dead. The movement for the restoration of the 10 Commandments of God wasn't your average fringe sect. It was a full-blown doomsday cult that promised the world would end on January 1, 2000. When that didn't happen, things turned violent, fast. The cult was founded in the 1980s by a group of former Catholic priests and visionaries, most notably Credonia Mwerinde and Joseph Kibwetere. They claimed to receive messages from the Virgin Mary and warned followers that the world had become too sinful to survive. To be saved, members had to obey the 10 Commandments, literally. That meant no lying, no intimacy, no talking unless told to speak. Even soap and deodorant were banned. Heaven, apparently, didn't allow personal hygiene. By the late 90s, the group had gathered thousands of followers across Uganda. Many sold all their possessions and donated everything to the cult. They were promised salvation, but instead, they got a death trap disguised as a church. When the world stubbornly refused to end on schedule, followers started to ask questions. That's when Morinde and the other leaders changed tactics. They announced a new date, March 17, 2000. This time, it wasn't just the end of the world, it was a party. A celebration. There'd be food, drinks, and a big send-off for the faithful. That morning, over 500 members gathered inside the cult's main church in Kanungu. The doors were boarded shut, candles were lit, and then, an explosion. The entire building went up in flames. No one came out. When police investigated the ruins, they expected to find evidence of a collective death. Instead, they uncovered clear signs of murder. Bodies had stab wounds, some were poisoned, others showed no signs of self-inflicted harm. Later, mass graves were found on cult-owned land. Some victims had been buried months earlier. Authorities believe the leaders staged the inferno to cover up the killings and escape with the donated money. Their bodies were never conclusively found. Credonia Morinde is still wanted by Interpol. There was no rapture waiting in Kanungu, only a church full of smoke and silence. The leaders vanished, hundreds were dead, and salvation was never part of the plan. When the sermon ends with boarded doors and flames, it isn't faith, it's murder disguised as prophecy. Angel's Landing. Daniel Perez told his followers he was an angel. Not a metaphorical one, a literal, eternal, shape-shifting being from heaven named Lou Castro. He said he could see the future, heal the sick, and protect anyone who lived on his compound, Angel's Landing, in Kansas. All he needed was loyalty, silence, and the occasional life insurance policy. The cult's setup was slick. Perez lived like royalty. Followers, mostly women and their children, called him a prophet. He surrounded himself with money, luxury cars, and gifts, all paid for by the tragic deaths of people close to him. When someone died unexpectedly, Perez was always the listed beneficiary. But no one asked questions. If they did, they were reminded that questioning Lou Castro meant questioning God. Survivors later said he used fear, manipulation, and isolation to keep control. He claimed to be 1,000 years old and said the world would soon end. You couldn't leave, and if you tried, something bad would happen. In 2003, something did. A 26-year-old woman named Patricia Hughes died during what Perez called a cleansing ritual in the compound's pool. The story was that she slipped, hit her head, and drowned. The police ruled it an accident, but the people inside knew it wasn't. Years passed. Then, in 2010, one of the children from Angel's Landing, now a teenager, told school officials what really went on inside. She said Perez wasn't an angel, he was an abuser. Investigators reopened the case and started digging, literally. They found financial records, false identities, and life insurance payouts totaling over $2.5 million. Most disturbing? Patricia's death wasn't the only one tied to Perez. The cleansings, it turned out, were part of a pattern. He staged deaths, he profited from them, and everyone came wrapped in spiritual nonsense and signed paperwork. In 2015, Daniel Perez was convicted on 28 charges, including first-degree murder, child exploitation, and fraud. He got life in prison. His angel gig? Cancelled permanently. Angel's Landing didn't reveal an angel, it exposed a scam. Behind the robes and promises was a man cashing life insurance checks while his followers drowned in lies. Prophets don't need payouts. Love has won. She called herself Mother God, claimed to be 19 billion years old, and said she had lived over 500 lifetimes, including stints as Jesus, Marilyn Monroe, and Joan of Arc. Her real name? Amy Carlson, and by 2021, she was the center of a full-blown New Age cult called Love Has Won. Emphasis on the one, not on reality. Carlson's followers believed she could heal the planet, control the weather, and speak with angels. They live-streamed daily messages, called her Mom, and obeyed her every word. Her commands included strict diets, sleep deprivation, and something called etheric surgery, which, shockingly, did not come with a medical license. She preached love and light, but ruled with fear. Members were cut off from family, forced into endless devotion, and punished for questioning her divinity. Carlson's health started to decline in 2020, but the group claimed it was due to planetary stress. In reality, she was reportedly consuming colloidal silver and alcohol daily while battling severe illness. By the time authorities found her in April 2021, Amy Carlson was dead, decomposing and wrapped in a sleeping bag, her face covered in glitter, her eyes missing, and Christmas lights strung around her body. She had been mummified and propped up in a makeshift shrine inside a Colorado home, while her followers, still very much alive, sat nearby as if nothing were wrong. The group claimed she had ascended. Police called it abuse of a corpse. 7 members were arrested, including the person who allegedly drove Carlson's body across state lines from California to Colorado. The house had children inside. The cult livestreamed just days before the bust. And yet, some followers still insisted she wasn't dead. They said she was simply resting until the planet raised its vibration high enough to bring her back. The legal fallout was messy. Charges were dropped, refiled, and bounced between jurisdictions. As of now, Love Has Won technically still exists, under a new name, 5D Full Disclosure. Because if there's one thing cults are good at, it's rebranding.